All right, welcome to the Grey Man Podcast. Today we've got a special guest from the Air Force, Ian Fraser, veteran of the Royal Australian Air Force and a veteran of Vietnam as well. So excited to talk to him today. So thanks for being here, Ian.
Thanks, Harley. Welcome. I'm glad to be here and participate.
Awesome. There you go. What did you get up to this morning?
I went for a lovely walk up at Mount Cootha with a bunch of ex-veterans and mates and my daughter, so it was lovely. So there were 6 of us did a lovely hour and a half walk up there, and
beautiful.
Beautiful time of the day, time of the year. It was just lovely.
Yeah, awesome. Getting to a good time of the year for that, actually. Weather's just right. Cool. So what I wanted to do today is just have a chat about your life and what took you to the military as a youth, and a bit about your time in and what you've done since. Cool. So let's go back to early times. Where'd you grow up?
I was born in Yeppoon, which is on the central coast of Queensland, up from Rockhampton. My mother was born in Longridge, out in Western Queensland. My father was born in Toowoomba, and they met during the war. My mum was a Women's Auxiliary Air Force person, so both of them were veterans. My dad was in the 2nd 15th Infantry Battalion, which was the Queensland-based battalion of the 20th Brigade, 9th Division. So he saw service in Darwin, then the Middle East. He was in siege of Tobruk, then in the base garrison in Syria, and then participated in the Second Battle of El Alamein, and then was repatriated home with the rest of the 9th Division to serve in New Guinea. So he landed at Finchhaven, fought in that part of New Guinea, and in other parts of New Guinea, and landed at the end of the war at Borneo at Balikpapan.
And where were you? Where were you born in all of that?
I was born in 1950, so that was 5 years after the war.
Okay.
So my mum and dad, my mum was based in Victoria Barracks, which was then located down from the Royal Brisbane Hospital in what people would know as Victoria Park now. Okay. And she was based in the Air Force in Brisbane. And obviously my dad, when he first enlisted, he was training out at Redbank, at the Army facility at Redbank, which is now a conservation reserve, White Rock Conservation Reserve. And obviously they met during the war, they married. And after the war, my eldest brother was born in Brisbane, and then my father got trained as a carpenter as part of the ability, having been in the AIF, to be retrained. And then he went to Darwin with my mum to reconstruct Darwin after the Second World War. And my sister was born in Darwin, but then he came to Yeppoon. I was born, and my other brother was born in Esk outside in the Brisbane Valley, and my final brother was born in Charleville. So we spent a lot of time travelling between, because he was an itinerant carpenter. Mm-hmm. So we spent a lot of time in Western Queensland between Longridge and Charleville, Augathella, Blackall, all those sort of towns we lived in. And then we moved into Brisbane in late 1950. And believe it or not, we were put in the barracks where my mum lived, was in the war, and we actually stayed in the same barrack block. They separated the blocks into houses. So before they started building housing commission homes. So we were there, and then we were allocated a housing home in East Mount Gravatt. So I moved to East Mount Gravatt, and I grew up in East Mount Gravatt. And I went to schooling at East Mount Gravatt and then Mount Gravatt High. And like a lot of people left school when I was 15.
What's that, grade 9?
Grade 10.
10.
So a lot of people don't understand what it was like back in those days. There was no free education at university. So the majority of people left school at year 10.
Yeah, got a trade or something.
Yeah, that's right. So in the group of people, I remember this statistic, which is pretty telling. Because we were all baby boomers, there was 1,000 of us that actually started year 8 at Mount Gravatt High.
1,000 grade 8s?
1,000 grade 8s.
Wow.
So we had lots of different classes here in A, B, C, D, E, different streams. So I was in the academic stream. But of the 1,000 kids that started school when I started at Mount Gravatt High, 11 of them made it to year 12. And of that 11, only 2 went to university because you couldn't afford university. So that just gives you an understanding of what the society was like.
Sign of the times, yeah.
Well, girls were not given any technical training. They did all home studies, which is cooking and sewing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because they were expected to go into the work, go into home, and guys were expected to do that. So when I left school, I got it because it was full employment because of high tariffs. I got a job in a factory out at Kessels Road, and then I joined the Postmaster General's Department, and I was actually transferred in the Postmaster General's Department down to Canberra because Canberra was expanding and they couldn't get any kids to do the telegram delivery. So I was based in the main post office in Canberra, and my job was to deliver telegrams all over the diplomatic, and so we'd go to the Chief of the Army Staff, all that, and lots to Parliament House, the old Parliament House where there was no security, so we'd just walk in the Deputy Prime Minister's office or the Prime Minister's office and drop the telegrams and walk out. There was, all I remember was the security in Parliament House. It was a big fat sergeant in the King's Hall. So you'd be walking around Parliament in and out of ministers' offices and that no one would question you and anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How old were you when you were doing that?
I was 16, so I left home when I was 16 because, like a lot of people at that age, my father, obviously I told you, served a lot of overseas and he had PTSD, and the way people treated PTSD in those days was through alcohol. So my father, both my father and mother progressed to being full-blown alcoholics, so we were a very disruptive household, domestic violence, the whole scene.
Okay.
So people look back at the 60s and the 50s and white picket fences and it's the time to be. But if you lived it,
The darker side.
there was the dark side of that, and I was glad to get out of home. And when I got an opportunity to go down there, it was funny because even those days I was 16 when I went to Canberra, and I actually was made a ward of the Postmaster General. So I was actually physically being looked after by a minister of the Commonwealth Government, me and another guy, and we would get ministerial staff officers come around to check on our welfare. But we did down there. But when I turned 17, I joined the Army Reserve, CMF, and I was in the 3rd Battalion, Royal New South Wales Regiment. And then when I moved back to Brisbane when I was 18, I then decided to join. I was going to join the Army, and another friend of mine, we went in there and he said, why don't you, instead of joining the Army, why don't you think about the Air Force? I said, I want to join the Army. Anyway, we got talked into going into the Air Force office, and we did all the tests and the guys offered me everything. And I said, well, really, I really want to only be an infantry guy. And they said, well, we've got an infantry unit in the Air Force. I didn't believe him. And this is the
Did they have an infant? Was it true?
Hey?
Was it true?
I became he talked me into becoming an airfield again, fence guard, and you'd appreciate what he did. He said, we've got these people, which they just formed the airfield defence guards, mainly because to defend the 3 bases they had overseas, which was one in Ubon in Thailand, one in Phang Rang in Vietnam, and one in Vung Tau in Phuc Thoi province. And I thought, well, I just read this novel called The Virgin Soldier, which was about a British national serviceman who went to Singapore during the confrontation, and I liked the seamy parts of it, and I thought, this is pretty good. And I said to the guy, I said, I'm not really interested in going to Vietnam, but this Thailand thing's all right. It's a long way from the war, but still in a very exotic place. He said, yeah, we're looking for people to go to Thailand. I said, oh, good, all right, I'll sign up here. So I signed up, and when I got down to Adelaide to do the recruit training, there was 3 in the 30-odd guys that were in the going through recruit training in that particular flight. They call them flights in the Air Force, not platoons. And we got called out. The corporal said, I want these 3 guys to come out. So me and these other 2 guys got called out. And said, I want you to meet these heroes. They're all going to Vietnam. And I said to the corporal, I said, it's a bit like the Air Force is a bit different from the Army. You could talk to corporals, they didn't scream at you, they didn't stand in your face. So you just say, it's cool. And of course, my Army experience, I'd been in the Army Reserve for 18 months. And I said, oh, no, I was told I was going to go to Ubon. And the guy said, yeah, that's probably true. He said, it's now March 1969. He said, Ubon was closed in December 1968.
Oh, no.
So 6 months later, I hopped off a plane, Qantas plane at Tonson Airport, said, oh, shit, okay.
When you were in the Army Reserves, what sort of requirement or obligation was there for that?
Oh, it was pretty
just
good.
Tuesday nights and weekends like we do now?
Well, it was, but you could I actually found a little niche in there because if you you could volunteer to do other work. As now, if you wanted to do as much work in the Army Reserve, you could. So I found out that at one stage I was surfing a lot and enjoying the Gold Coast when I came back to Brisbane, and I decided that you could go down to Greenbank for 6 weeks solid when all the cadets were doing their annual training. So you'd go down there and you'd actually I worked in the queue store handing out things, stuff like that, and it was a great thing. But my mum was a bit concerned that my lifestyle of surfing and working in the Army was not going to develop into a productive lifestyle.
So you were still had a bit of contact with your parents?
I moved back home from Canberra. So I was out in Canberra for 2 years, and then I moved back and I transferred from the 3R and SRWR to 9RQR.
Yeah.
And then with the exercises we did with them, and I really enjoyed my time in the Army Reserve. The comradeship I thought was only matched by when I was an airfield defence guy. It was just a really close, good rapport. And And that when I was doing it was interesting when I got a first taste of rum. We were there. There was all these old warrant officers that were there, like to look after the kids. They're there, and I'm sitting there. There was 3 of them, and I think I was there, and I was just minding my own business as an 18-year-old. And they invited me in to drink with them one night. And anyway, I started drinking this rum out of the army pannikins. So they were filling the pannikins you get with your water bottle,
kidney bottle, sort of.
Yeah, up to about the second. Fill it up with rum up to about the second thing and drank them. And at the end of the night, I don't know how I made it back to my bed, but it took me 3 days to get off my cot. And I've never drunk rum again.
Really?
No, I can't stand it. But it was really interesting. These guys had, back in those days, they'd all been to Vietnam. They'd all been to Korea and they'd all served in the Second World War. So these 3 guys, you're just sitting there listening to their stories. It was just mind-boggling. But the thing I remember is the smell of rum and moving off my stretcher to up in my toenails into the dirt for 3 days, and I can't stand rum.
That was Scotch for me when I was a teenager. I think I was 16, and I almost had to have my stomach pumped, and I couldn't even the smell of Scotch now.
Ugh. Yeah. So, but it was good to meet those guys. They were, they were really good, and as I said, they just looked after me while I was trying to recover from this bout of alcoholism.
So you went. When you went to the Air Force, so you joined as an AGI?
Yes.
Airfield Defence.
So they did our recruit training at Edinburgh, and then we transferred up here to Amberley, and the training was done at Amberley, and we were part of a unit called for 3 aircraft depot, but there was a part of that was called a security training flight, so we were trained as AGIs there, so they're pushing through the AGIs in quite fast to get them over to Vietnam. And
so this is to sort of defend the air bases.
Yeah. So what the rules were, I've learned out since then, because once I became an AGI in the Air Force, I was always an AGI in the Air Force. Didn't matter what I did, I wasn't too far away from being an AGI. The time the Air Force wanted someone to wear a pair of green overalls, they come and tap you on the shoulder. But the Air Force had responsibility, and still has, for close-in protection of the asset.
Yeah.
Then the Army has a responsibility for protecting the airfield. But obviously in Ubon there was no Australian Army people, and in Phang Rang there wasn't any Australian Army people. There were Australian Army people at Vung Tau, but when we were co-located with Allied forces, like I'll talk about Phang Rang in a second. So we did our training. Then I went down to Fairburn in Canberra, and this is where the Air Force sort of differed from the Army a bit. And to be a bit critical of them now as time goes by, they sort of failed us as individual people going into war zones. Where the Army would do your core training and then you'd go to your unit, and the unit would be deployed, like the battalions would deploy in a hole to Vietnam, and they would do lots of training in the lead up to that. And they still do that when they deploy overseas. The Air Force didn't there. We just went to an airfield defence flight of about 30 people, which was based at Fairburn. And my job at Fairburn for 6 months was ceremonial guard duty. So every time there was a requirement for an ambassador to present their credentials, or opening of Parliament, or Anzac Day up at the War Memorial, or there's tons of functions that happen up at the War Memorial. So every time that happened, we would form the Air Force component of the Guard. So all I did was mainly ceremonial guard for 6 months.
When you're going to deploy, you want it to be more doing hand-to-hand combat and shooting and
all that. So
stuff.
we did, we did ongoing training, but nothing to prepare us to go to Vietnam. So like we did an exercise. We were the enemy for Dun Truon, and we went up into the Brindabellas in like middle of winter to do jungle warfare, which just
attacking the officer cadets.
Yeah. Well, but it was just benign. Here we were doing jungle warfare, and we didn't have any winter clothing. We were actually doing jungle warfare in 1 or 2 foot of snow.
What?
And I remember one time this young cadet was there, and we'd done some attack or something, and afterwards he lost it and threw his gun on the ground. So
I'm done.
This is just stupid. We're trying to, we should be fighting about how to fight in Stalingrad, not in the jungles. And this old warrant officer thought he'd chew his head off, just put his arm around and said, "That's all right, son. I understand it's stupid, but this is what we got to do." Picked his gun, he went away. But yeah, it was really cold because the Air Force didn't give us any winter clothing. So we were up there in summer.
So how do you survive that?
Well, we had to wear 2 or 3 sets of greens, and we had to sleep in sleeping bags, two or three of us in a sleeping bag to keep warm.
Cuddle up.
And we didn't have any packs, so we had to go and buy our own packs. And this Army general come through, and it was like a Boy Scout camp, all these different packs that went out. And he just couldn't believe that the Air Force had sent people out into the field without any proper equipment.
Yeah. Why were you playing enemy party for the Army?
Yeah, for the RMC, yeah.
Why were they asking you, not infantry or army dudes?
Well, because we were trained along the same lines. It'd be wrong to say we were trained. We had the same syllabus as someone going through Singleton when they did that, but different training, different stuff.
Yeah.
And
you're available.
Well, yeah, I think that was what they did. We did lots of training as enemy. I mean, I remember when I came back from Vietnam, we went and trained. We were the enemy against 9th Battalion before they deployed. So it was quite a big job we would do. We'd be always deploying to be the enemy force or part of the enemy force.
Did you enjoy playing enemy party?
Well,
when you went cold?
No, yeah. Well, up there, I mean, honestly, unless you've actually been in the Brindabellas in the middle of winter when it's snowing and you're wearing jungle outfit, it's quite challenging. It was freezing cold. I mean, you couldn't touch your rifles, and it was just sleep.
Wake up with a layer of frost over the top of you.
Yeah, it was just really, 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 really difficult 6 weeks.
Anybody get frostbite?
Oh yeah, there are people that had to be evacuated because of the cold and that. It was just terrible. So
brutal.
Yeah, it was. And we dug at the trench session because it was all about mine warfare. So the first part of there, we were deployed to dig this an enemy tunnelling system. I don't know if it's still there, but it was made of corrugated iron, and it was just this big. And the battle at the end was for these people to attack this complex, and we were part of defending it. But it was interesting. I mean, but still very cold and very just. We felt ice. There was not very strong feelings towards the Air Force deploying people into the snow.
Did you form a pretty strong bond with those guys you were sharing sleeping bags with and stuff?
Yeah, that's it, because it was a combination of people who had already been to Vietnam and people that came back. So one of the guys that was a friend of mine was a bloke called Dave Dubber, and he died in a helicopter accident in Vietnam, or got shot out of the air, and he was killed in Vietnam. So about 2 or 3 of the people we knew there had been to Vietnam or were going to be deployed there. So a lot of the people from Fairburn, because 5 Squadron was co-located at the base, so a lot of guys there were familiar with helicopters, and they ended up being crewmen on helicopters in Vietnam. And so about 3 or 4 of those people that I work with were killed in helicopter incidents.
Right. And you seeing all the guys coming back and stuff from Vietnam, did, like you were saying, your dad came back with a pretty heavy dose of PTSD. Were you finding the same thing with the officers and all the NCOs and stuff you were working with?
No. At that stage, I think because we knew we'd be going to Vietnam, I think it didn't really worry us too much. I mean, it's only when it happened and when you come back. So before you go there to deploy, even you might know what it's about, but you don't know until you actually go into that. Then it happens to you.
And how long were you kicking around as an Adgie before you got your first
6 months.
deployment?
So yeah, I finished in August and I was deployed in March
To Vietnam?
To Vietnam, yeah. So
as your first deployment?
Yeah, so we deployed to Phang Rang Air Base, and again, there was no pre-deployment training. You just one day the sergeant said, "Here's your posting orders. You're going in 2 weeks' time. You've got 7 days pre-embarkation leave to go home to your family. You come back, and then you're going to Vietnam." So there was no obviously we had all our at that stage all our medical and immunizations are all up to date. So it was just a matter of coming in on a Friday saying, right, in 10 days' time, you're going to be going to Vietnam. There was no training, no nothing. And then...
Did you have family of your own by then?
No, I was single. So I came back to Brisbane to say goodbye to my mum and dad and my younger brothers. My older brother had already been deployed to Vietnam. Of my 4 brothers, 3 of us went to Vietnam. Oh, wow. So when I went to Vietnam, my brother was already there as an engineer in Phuc Toi province. And during the time that I was there, my other brother who joined the army for RAR, he was deployed. So for about 2 years there was always a Fraser in Vietnam.
Did you ever cross paths?
Yeah, I saw my brother, but I didn't see my younger brother, but I saw my older brother. I went
the
down
engineer?
I went down to Vung Tau and I on some work that I had to do, and I got caught up with him there for not days or anything like that, just meeting and go and do your own thing. Yeah. So
how did it feel on those 2 weeks or 10 days when you got the notification? How did it feel during those 10 days before you sort of?
Well, I think it was, to be honest, it was such a blur that it's hard to, by the time you come home and say goodbye to all your friends that you went to high school with and all that, and of course everything you went, and of course at that stage of the game, to drink in a pub you had to be 21.
Oh, did you?
You had to vote to be 21. So even I remember we had a couple of bottles of beer and with some friends, and we went up to what is now the current suburb of Wishart, but that was being developed at the time. There wasn't any houses there. And we were sitting there having a few drinks with my mates from the high school, and the coppers come around and said, "What are you guys doing?" Because we were all underage. And I just said to the copper said, "Well, I'm going to Vietnam next week." He said, "Oh, right, okay, mate."
Drink up.
So he went. But yeah, so I mean, the difference was then that most people in the street had been in the army or the Air Force and stuff like that. Like in my street, we had in my scout leaders, but because I was in the scouts before I joined, they were all ex-people like the defector sergeant who lived up the road. He was a commando in the Second World War. We actually had a German immigrant across the road who was a good friend of ours, Hildebrandt. He was a member of the Africa Corps. So him and Dad used to get on really well, even though they never they never shot each other or something, but they would all share fire, about that. So so when you're deployed that quick, it's just so fast. And you're not there's no, it's not like the army, we're going to go next week, the whole unit's got to be prepared. You're just an individual. You're either going to East Sale or Townsville or something like that. You just pack your gear up. So you pack your personal gear up, it goes down to the movement section. You go and you come back, and next minute you're sitting at Mascot Airport, and it wasn't with a group of people. There were 6 of us. Met at Mascot Airport, and we had to wear civilians. We had to wear uniforms. There was no farewells. There was no families. There was no bands. It was just like you were going on a business trip. So
kind of.
Yeah, hopped on an aircraft and stopped in Darwin in their civilians. Then went to Singapore. We weren't allowed to leave the airport. We were sort of in a special zone with Singapore policemen walking around with machine guns. And next minute we landed at Tonsanut Air Base in a war zone. So you went from completely, peaceful places like Singapore, Darwin and Sydney. Within X amount of hours, you hopped into a war zone. So you hopped off this plane.
What was that flight like, that last flight where you?
Oh, that was all right.
Going to be in the
I don't think it was just, but it was like a long flight, even though it was a 707, it still was a long flight. And then we just got off but as soon as you got off Tonsanut, it was, this is a war zone. So as you landed at Tonsanut, all it was just acre of revetments with fighter aircraft and transport aircraft and helicopter aircraft, and you come down the thing in civilians, and you walked into this location, and then suddenly everyone was armed to the teeth, and it was this was a war zone.
Could you hear the sound of war?
No, just because that's in Saigon. Tonsanut was the big air base in Saigon, so there was no just tons and tons of fighter aircraft taking, or aircraft noise, helicopters flying, aircraft, transport aircraft taking off, and then you're there, and just then you first see other people that have actually been not Australians but Americans, so Americans in faded jeans and I'll remember there was a group of them that were there with their weapons, but they had the classic 1000 stare, like they were just.
Yeah,
they weren't zombies, but they were, because that was where most Americans got not evacuated, but repatriated home, was through Tonsanut. So Tonsanut was the main area in and out.
1,000 yards there. They've seen some shit.
Hey?
They've seen some shit.
Oh yeah. So, but you realised and then we got put on an aircraft. We got changed into our greens. And then we put on what they call a C-123, which was they used to call them baby Hercs. And then we flew from Tonsanut to Phan Rang. Phan Rang is about 200. It wasn't near Vung Tau at all. It wasn't Phuoc Thai province. It was well away. Then we landed at Phan Rang, and that was not as big as Tonsanut, but it was a pretty big air base. There was 17,000 people based at Phan Rang. So the whole Royal Australian Air Force at the moment would have been based at Phan Rang Air Force. And the size of it too, there was different. They didn't have squadrons, they had wings. So the 35th Tactical Fighter Wing or the 4th 100, and it was the same thing like Tonsanut, but smaller. There was, 2 or 3 wings, each made up of 4 or 5 squadrons of fighter aircraft or fighter bombers and transport aircraft and gunships and helicopters, and that was at Phan Rang. So we got there and then went down. And
did you and your 5 mates that you left with all go to the same place?
Yeah, we were all going to Phan Rang, but we weren't all Aggies. I was the only Aggie. The rest of them were cooks and technicians and aircraft maintenance people. There was no officers. We were all, and there was no NCOs. We were all LACs. So there was no. We all had to make our own way. We were responsible for looking after ourselves. We weren't under command of anybody. It was just, this is your travel orders. 18-year-old, you're going to go to the other part of the world and you're responsible for getting on the plane. It's the difference from the army. Yeah, right. You're responsible for getting on and off the plane. You're responsible to turn up at where you are. That's what the Air Force expects you to do. They don't drill stuff into you.
More adult.
Well, you're just treated. You're supposed to be able to do that sort of stuff. And you don't think about it, honestly. You don't think about being spoon-fed. They tell you to do something, you go and do it.
Yeah, a bit of a difference. So you got there. And then straight to work? Or?
Yeah, the next day we got there and we met our section commander and we introduced ourselves to doing. I don't even recall, to be frank with you, even meeting our flight commander, our flight lieutenant to be a captain, or we just met our corporal. We were shown our bunks. We were living in a bunks. And he said, tomorrow morning we're going to go to the range. So we woke up the next morning, we went to the range and we fired all the weapons. So we had M16s, F1s, SLRs, and M60s. So we did all that, and he then made a decision where I would fit in the section. So the sections were made up of 10 men, but they were in fire groups. The Army's done it now, but we had 2 machine guns. We had 2 M60s, so the thing was split into like fire groups. So 2 M60s, and then people with SLR. So the section was made up of a forward scout who carried an M16, a second scout who carried an SLR, the second commander who carried an M16, a radio operator who carried an F1. Then you would have 2 machine gunners. You didn't have any deputy machine gunners. You carried all your rounds you needed. Everyone carried rounds, but you had to carry 2,000 rounds on your belt, on yourself. And then we had one person in the riflemen that were left over carried an M79 40 mic grenade launcher. And our job was in what had happened when the Aggies first deployed to Phan Rang, they didn't know what to do with them because the base was completely surrounded by barbed wire, 3 belts of barbed wire with anti-personnel mines. And the Americans were American Air Force security police were all on the inside of the wire. So they'd have dogs and big towers with machine guns in them and heavy weapon sections, but they were not trained as infantrymen. So when we got there, they didn't know what to do with us. So they decided that because we were trained up that we would go out and conduct night ambushes and night patrols. So the 30 men that were there, we at a 17-mile perimeter, we would go out up to 1,500 metres because the whole area was under the control of the Koreans. So it was the White Horse Division. So they had responsibility for the province, and they were based on a big hill, like about 10 kilometres away from the base, big fortress in the top of the hill. And our job was, because what the Viet Cong would do, Phan Rang was in a valley surrounded by hills, and what the Viet Cong would do was launch 120 millimetre rockets into the base from the hills. And whilst I was there in the 365 days, the base was mortared or rocketed 177 days.
177 of the day.
So that any time of day or night, the rockets would come in and the whole base would shut down.
Every other day.
Hey?
Every other day, basically.
Yeah, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, the rockets would come in and what they were trying to do. And our job was, the rockets were not aimed, so they were randomly. So you can imagine a big base of 17-mile perimeter, even though there's lots, if you see it, it was a little mini town. It had traffic lights. It had movie theatres. It had everything there. It was like a little base. But there's still, to aim a 120 millimetre rocket there, but still they'd hit shrapnel and the objective was to hit the flight line.
What would be the blast radius of where it landed?
This table, the actual to see the thing in the ground wasn't very big, but the shrapnel spread was quite amazing. So just when they landed, they, as I said, there tons. Most people, we were lucky because where the Air Force domestic area was sort of under the arc of the weapons. Just by accident, it wasn't designed. It was where they were, the weapons, and they were heading to go. There was a big hill in the middle of the base, so they'd line up the rockets from the mountains to go over the hill. So they'd like if you just imagine chipping a golf ball over a bunker, or you want the thing to go over the hill. If you knew you got the thing over the hill, how thing was on one side and the main part of the base was on the other. So most of the rockets and the things hit the other side of the hill, which were where the Americans lived. And, of course, they had lots of casualties, people killing, I
so their sleeping quarters were getting hit?
Yeah, I remember walking up one day where one of these rockets had hit and there was a big, a guy just been killed, I happened to be there and, he wasn't there anymore, but you could see the blood and shit that was left over from him. Yeah. So but what they would do is they would come down with mortar teams. So the mortar teams were about 70 people.
In the Viet Cong?
Yeah, so they have 4 mortars, and if you've ever seen one of the Russian mortars, they've got little things where you can carry them on lugs on the side of them.
They're little 60 mils or?
No, 88 millimetre mortars.
Oh, wow.
Or whatever. It's not 88 mil, but very close to 88 mil.
81.
Something like that. So, but they've got lugs on this, different from our mortars. They've got lugs on them where you can actually physically carry the mortar. So they'd have 4 mortars. So 2 men would carry the mortar, a man would carry the base, then they'd have people carrying the ammunition, and then they'd have a protection party. So all up about 70 people involved in a mortar. And what they would bring the mortars down, and they'd bring the mortars down to line up with the flight line. And, of course, when it was a 24-hour operation, so they'd turn the lights on when a plane was landing. So they'd be sitting out there, and they would then launch the mortars into the base. And what they were able to do is they were so well trained is that they'd set the 4 mortars up and they'd have 4 rounds per tube. So the first guy would let the mortar go down, and then they'd go through that sequence. And by the time the last guy had let his mortar had parted from the 4th tube, the first tube had been disassembled, and they were, to use a Vietnamese term, diddy mowing, because the Americans had radar. So they would, and there was a Korean 105 millimetre battery on the base. So and the American Air Force had mortars too. So as soon as they found the mortars coming in, they would do counter battery fire. So they would, but our job was not to fight these people because there was only 10 of us and maximum. So people were sick or away. There could be as many never less than about 8, but about 8 to 10 would go out, and we would go out a kilometre from the base, set up, and try and interdict these people coming into the thing. And so we did 2 days of that, 2 days of day patrol. So our job would be to go around outside of the base to do patrolling to see whether we could pick up any activity from the Viet Cong, and then 2 days of rest and recreation. But that never happened because every time you had a day off, there'd be a job for you to do.
Yeah. When you're having time just walking around the base, are there shells coming in directly into like the sort of rec area?
Yeah, we're quite well every time the airline, every accommodation area was surrounded by, because they were using a lot of bombs, the bombs come in big containers. So all those containers were filled with sand, and every accommodation area was surrounded by these things filled with sand, and then there was sandbags. Yeah, so we got to we learned how to do sandbagging again. So we were always responsible for upgrading of any of those defences. We were manually responsible for making sure that all the protection of the areas were there. And then in between each accommodation block, there was a bomb shelter, which was also, reinforced. And every time the air raid siren went, people had to come out of their accommodation box or where they were, go into the air raids, go into their bunker until it was all clear. So it'd be constant, big, you hear a big, and then they'd come out and say, the base is clear, you can go back to work. So
is that just like even before you went, you were saying it was kind of a blur. Was that like a blur when you were there as well? Because it was just like always on, the adrenaline and stuff.
Yeah, that's when that was, believe it or not, you've hit the nail. It just, the problem was that only 30 of us doing a job where there was like 17 kilometres. We were constantly patrolling. 30, you can imagine if there was a civil affairs thing, we had to go out and be escort. If there was a supply run to Cameron Bay, which was down the road, we had to do that. The only facility for people on the base to have any recreational thing was a beach down at the Phang Rang Beach, and there was an area set up down there, and so any time that people were off and they could go down the beach for a bit of recreation, we had to escort them down there and escort them back. So it was constant occasionally you get time off, but unlike the army, when you finished at night time, when you're on your day patrols, because when you're on day patrols, you're on quick reaction force. So 2 days a week, you could actually physically drink, but the Air Force didn't restrict the amount of drinking you could do. So like the army, you'd get 2 cans per day perhaps, but in the Air Force, the mess was there and the booze was 10 cents a can or $2.40 for a 30-ounce bottle of spirits. So we just got blotto because there was nothing else to do but to
do 2 days off.
Yeah. Well, mainly at night time, but
after work.
Yeah. So you could, if you weren't required to do something, But when you're on QRF on the day patrols, you weren't allowed to drink, and obviously,
you got to be ready to go.
You didn't drink when you were doing patrol. You slept, you woke up, you got ready, and then went down, get your security briefing, and then went out on. We'd leave the base at dawn, just after dusk, then navigate to where we had to set up the position, dead reckoning, and then you'd have to navigate back in the morning before the first light, so that you arrived at the base still under dark.
Yeah. Okay.
So you left at dark and came home at dark.
I didn't see you coming in and out. When you're doing these sort of recce teams, trying to find the mortar teams, did you ever come into close contact with them?
Yeah, we had contacts here. We were involved in two incidents. One was one I'm pretty proud of, actually. One was a contact with Viet Cong. Viet Cong, we interdicted them. They walked into our position, so we let loose there for a while. So one of our guys was wounded. Another guy had the leg of his M60 shot off. Because of where we were, they walked into one part of the section and the fire was on, and because they hit the machine gun, it was out of action. Then I had to fire over the heads of my other troop for the Viet Cong. So me and the Viet Cong exchanged some rounds, and an Air Force plane landed while we were having the contact. And for many years, I thought I'd put 2 bullets into the aircraft because it flew through the machine gun bullets. But in actual fact, he didn't get hit by my bullets. He got hit by the Viet Cong bullets because the Viet Cong was firing at me. And so they missed me and hit the aircraft.
You're coming in behind you, yeah.
Yeah, the aircraft was landing because we were right at the end of the approach lights. And then another time, which was very harrowing, my job, I started off as a machine gunner, then I became the scout because I don't know, I couldn't navigate because it's very dangerous at night time. You had to know where you're going. And all the time we were out there was constant what they call fire interdiction things. So coming from the base, the Koreans and the Americans would be firing stuff into where they thought the Viet Cong would be forming up or something that they called it fire and interdiction. So it was very dangerous because it was a free fire zone. So when you're out there, there was no rules of contact. There was no stop, halt, who goes there. Anybody who was there was presumed to be enemy, right?
Yeah.
But one night we were out there and I was the forward scout and I heard some noise and movement. Anyway, we had a very primitive thing called a starlight scope, which was you could vaguely see things at night time with it. It wouldn't, anyway. I had the starlight scope. I think the corporal carried the starlight scope and came up and we looked and there was a ox cart or something there. And under the ox cart, there was someone laying there. And it was like an open area from where we were in foliage because where we worked in Phan Rang, it was, people are hard to believe, but it was like savannah country in Australia. It wasn't jungle. It was like open grassland with trees and.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it wasn't. You weren't.
Yeah, I was thinking more dense sort of.
No, it was really open country, so you could see stuff. So we saw these people there, and the base was surrounded by paddy fields too, because it was built in a valley. So they'd reclaimed, or the French had reclaimed areas. It was an old French airfield. The Americans had expanded. The Japanese had used it for the Second World War. Then when we left, the Russians used it for a while, and it's still a Vietnamese Air Force base. But this thing, we saw these people under this path. You could see it there. And I'm sitting there with my corporal and we're trying to work out what it is. And my corporal, being an old wise guy of 22, said, we're going to have to check it out. I said, oh, are we? He said, yes. I said,
22.
I said, oh, okay. He said, yes, you're going to go across there and see whether or not that's a person. Oh. He said, we'll wait here. We're going. So what they did is the whole section deployed. Then they got onto the radio to the base. So then the mortars were activated. The Korean battery was activated. There was what they call a smoky. There was a gunship up in the air. So this is one of these things, black. They call it smoky. Had the miniguns ready, and they activated that. And so he said, "You go across." So I had to crawl across this open ground in moonlight, and he said, go across there and check this guy out. If you don't die, you ought to kill him. So I'm going across the ground like thinking, and I
was going through your head when you're doing
Well,
this?
I went to a Catholic school and I suddenly discovered religion. So as I was going across the ground, all I could think about is to concentrate on what I was doing was to get across this ground. I just keep saying it. This Hail Mary, Hail Mary, Hail Mary. Don't know why, but they just got me across the ground because it was quite absolutely. Even now, it's hard to think of how exposed you are, and you're at the front end of the tip. That's where the military law comes in. A 22-year-old corporal says, you got to go and do it, you got to do it. At the end of the day, as a 19-year-old kid, you've got to make a decision whether someone's going to live or die. So I got to this thing, and it was an old guy. And I...
It's a farmer.
Yeah, and so he was there and I got my K9 knife out and because I had an M16, I didn't have an M16 bayonet, I had a combat knife and I was just about ready to kill this guy and I looked up and there to the left of him, which we couldn't see from our position, were all these Vietnamese farmers harvesting rice. But the problem of them was they were in a free fire zone and they had the same, could have been Viet Cong disguising themselves as that. So the problem was that if I'd killed the guy, he obviously wouldn't have died really quietly. There's no walking up and slitting someone's throat. Someone's not going to die. So this poor guy, when I put my hand over his mouth, just a bit of plunge this thing into him. He's, it took me years to get rid of the face of this guy, just totally, absolutely dead. As his adrenaline just freezing, and his eyes opened up, and he knew he was going to die. And then I had to make this decision. And this is where I think our training as Australians come in. That had I done anything other than sing out to these people, and it's, Uktala Australia, hands up, put your hands up. If I hadn't have done that, what would have happened is that all them people would have been murdered because my section would have thought I was in trouble. They would have just let loose. Then the artillery would have started, the gunships would have started, the mortars would have started, and those people would have been butchered. So we just went and, patted them down, done it, and all they were doing was harmlessly harvesting rice in a moonlight, which they'd probably been doing for 10,000 years. But they could have died that night.
They didn't know that it was a militarised zone?
Oh, they did, but they
wanted the rice.
They wanted the rice. They wanted to harvest the rice. And so they were very lucky. But you talk about moral injury. You just put yourself in a place, you're sitting there middle of the night and you've got a life and death decision over somebody, but not only that person, but all the other people that we didn't know were there. So I'm proud of the fact that I didn't kill the guy.
Yeah.
And, it caused me a lot of problems later on in life in the sense that I know what it's like to kill somebody. So you can take it right up to the end degree. You can then project that fear. Once you know what the fear is, and I know you're a mixed martial arts person, once you know that the opponent knows that you're going to take it to a step that they're not even prepared to do, once you've got that look of fear in someone else's eyes, you've won the battle. So for many years I was physically aggressive, and I knew with my opponent that as soon as they looked at it, I could get that look in my face. I'm going to hurt you more than you ever think you're going to hurt me. And most fights didn't get that far. But
you sort of you were trying to find that again, that feeling of dominance.
Yeah. Once you had that, you could use it to you. I'm not proud of it, but that was the way it was. So we did that, and then, as I said, the whole time there was just constant. And it's when you tell people, and particularly the Army people, they don't understand the sort of work that you did. And the Air Force doesn't recognise it either because, when you look at it, we were defending a base of 17,000 people. The Americans do. I'm in an American Facebook group, and they have a tremendous amount of respect for what we did because they know what we did and they know the training that they did. So they on their Facebook page, they always recognise it. But the Air Force didn't recognise us because we weren't aviators, we weren't flying jets.
Yeah.
And the Army doesn't recognise us because they think they're the only ones who can wear green uniforms and do stuff. So,
so there was no other Australian military there other than you guys?
No,
right. So
there was 270 Air Force people there, and the majority of them were involved in the Canberra bombers doing the bombing and supporting them. And, of course, there were cooks and clerks and stuff like that doing suppliers and all that, supporting the unit. But, yeah.
Yeah, right. So how long were you positioned there for?
377 days.
Oh, really?
1 year, yeah. So after the Vietnam, that's where they've gone from contemporary vet. They went too much. So when you look at it, 377 days in total, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah, that's a long time.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
And my dad in the Second World War, as I said, he did Alamein, Trabuc, Finchhaven and all that. His total time in active service in the Second World War was 1,000 days.
Okay.
So in that 1,000 days, that means he could have been in the Mediterranean theatre. 1,000 days would have been up in Aleppo, up in there, or in the siege of Trabuc or something like that, right? But so he's 6 years in the Army, 1,000 days, and 1 year in Vietnam, 377 days.
Yeah. Where did you go when you left?
Well, we came back to Amberley, and then I decided that even though I got promoted to corporal and I was going to I didn't want to become a drill instructor because a lot of the Aggies became drill instructors, and I just didn't want to do that. I didn't see that. So I decided to remuster to a clerk supply, and then I remustered to a clerk supply, went down to Wagga to do my training. Then I went to Fairburn again as a clerk supply in Fairburn. And I started going to the Australian National University, and then the Air Force picked me up and sent me to university full time. I became a logistics officer.
What was it like? You'd seen a lot of people on the flip side of the war that you worked with before you went. What was it like when you sort of crossed that line and you came back?
Well, I think mainly because all of us in the Aggies all went to war. We were all volunteers and we all come back. When we were at Amberley, we were all we'd all been. There was no, I've done this or you've done it. It was
All together.
We were all together, right? When I became a clerk supply, obviously, before I finished being an Aggie, I could become parachute qualified. And one of the things I'm really proud of is that we went down. There was 3 of us on this parachute training course, and it was a SAS Carter course. And we're doing the parachute training. At the end of the course, these 2 Army officers come up and spoke to me and this other guy. And I said, we've been keeping an eye on you and we think we'd like you. And we say, what do you mean you like us? And they said, well, we'd like you to come across to the SAS regiment. And of course, I was engaged to Lynn at the time. I said, I don't go to bloody SAS. So they were a bit disillusioned that we'd done all this training at the parachute training course with the SAS Carter course. And they offered us to join the SAS. And we said, no, we don't want to join. Because I was going to become done the course and I was thinking about remustering and then, but when
no interest in doing that.
I think, but honestly, I wanted to get an education and, I want to get married and I just wanted, So even when I got married, I was still an Aggie and for the first, my son was born and, again, just stupid things in the military make you want to change. I remember my wife was 9 months pregnant and, we went to the house section commander was a warrant officer and I went there to put a leave app in to have time off with my wife and the warrant officer said, no, your neighbours can do that. Anyway, then you don't know what to do. And this is how you learn stuff in the military. This sergeant was an admin sergeant in the reserve squadron, 23 squadron, I think it is. I said, this is hopeless. What am I going to do? He said, give me this. And he said, get it reviewed. I didn't know you could do that. So anyway, I took it back to the warrant. I said, I want this reviewed. Bluffed and nothing. So anyway, because I'd done it, the review, it had to go back. And so next minute I get called down to the CO of the unit, which was about 600 strong. So this guy's a group captain, so he's like a full colonel. And me, the flight lieutenant and the warrant officer get in and, here we go, I'm going to get told what the Air Force is all about and go and bloody chew your thing. And he said, come in, he said, what's the story with your wife? I said, well, she's 9 months pregnant, she's a week overdue and she doesn't have the baby soon, she's going to be induced. And I said, she doesn't have a license, there's no buses, I need to take her to the hospital and look after her. So we don't have any family here or any of that. Oh, he said, and I was going to be deployed on this exercise, which was just a local exercise. And he said to the flight lieutenant, he said, have I missed something, Flight Lieutenant X? I'm going, where's this going? He said, I get all these intelligence reports. Is there something that is happening next week that I'm not aware of? He said, what is this exercise here? We've got to keep them up to speed and all this sort of stuff. So there's no war, there's no nothing. He said, why can't we let this guy go home and look after his missus? This is the Air Force that I'm in. This is not the difference. And I'll give you another example of the difference between the Army and the Air Force. He said, I think we should let him go. He said, LSA Fraser, you go and do your leave and say hello to your missus for me and we'll hope everything goes well with the boat. Sort of thing. Anyway, the 3 of us started to leave and he said, oh, no, you 2 guys can stay here for a minute. And as I'm walking out here, what the so I went back in. Anyway, it was good fun. But another example of this, the difference between the Air Force and the Army, was when I was in Vietnam, my mum died. And this is a very good story and true story. And I was at the time studying I thought in Vietnam you could either, become a booze head or learn. So I'd left before I graduated as year 10. So I started studying when I was in Vietnam. I said, you can study. So I started studying because the Services Certificate of Education thing. It was it was like year 12. You could get this certificate and it would be recognised by the state governments.
Okay.
So I studied anyway. I'm just studying away. No one is helping me. I'm just reading the books and all that sort of stuff, putting as much work I could in between drinking and fighting and all that, patrolling and all that. Anyway, next thing they said, this is what the military does. Oh, you got to go to Vung Tau. What am I going to Vung Tau for? Well, the exam is going to be held in Vung Tau and the army's running it, and you've got a week to go down there to do pre-study. And, of course, I'm sitting there whether I could be walking around in paddy fields and doing that or go down to Vung Tau for a week. I said, when do I leave? So we went down there, but unfortunately, whilst I was studying, the next day was the exam, the Air Force had blue Tojos, and I could see we had Sydney William huts, and I'm looking at it, and suddenly this blue car started coming towards me, and okay, and this guy gets out in an Air Force uniform, walks up and gets directed into my thing and comes in. We had an army officer who was educated, training us, lecturing us, and this guy looks up and he points to me and I get called over and he said, oh, you've got to step outside, this padre wants to talk to you. And my dad had been really sick and I thought, oh, my dad's passed. So I walked outside and he said, oh, your mum's dead. Oh, shit. And I just thought, what am I going to do? I'm not only am I away from my home unit.
This when you're still 19?
Yeah. So I didn't know what to do. And he just said, now this is what's going to happen. He said, we're going to go in there, we're going to pack everything up, you're going to go back to Vung Tau, and we're going to send you home. Oh, okay. We've been in touch with your family. They're going to put off the funeral until the Monday. And this was like Friday or something like that. So I've said goodbye to everyone, got my bag, I was a bit disappointed because we're going to do the exam the next day. And I thought, geez, well, I do the exam, we're going to the funeral. So anyway, I've gone back to Vung Tau and everyone's greeting me and saying it's okay. And they said, right, what you're going to do, we're going to go down and give you drabs, it's the Air Force uniform. You can buy your civvies back in Australia. So I just had drabs, and the only gun I had, you had to have a gun. I had a pistol that I got issued by the Yanks. It was a 38 caliber Smith & Wesson, so that had to be secured.
Bring on the flight back.
Yeah, no, it had to be secured and transported back to Phan Rang.
Oh, yeah.
So the pistol, and then I got changed in the drabs. I didn't have my pay book or nothing because you didn't need any pay books or nothing. You just ate whatever food was in the mess. You didn't. So they gave me Australian money and they said, oh, you're going to go to Tonsanut. We're going to take you to Tonsanut. Okay. So I go down to the flight line. There's this helicopter there. And this guy comes up and says to me, do you mind if I come on with you to the flight? And I said, well, I'm just going on that helicopter. There's no, I don't control anything. And he said, all right. He said, that's your helicopter. I said, no, helicopter just going to be going on the helicopter. He said, no, that is your helicopter. I said, what do you mean? That's my helicopter. This is the helicopter that's going to take you from Vung Tau. So there's 2 pilots, 2 gunners, a helicopter, and me flying from Vung Tau to Saigon. And this guy's jumped onto, because we were flying over the Delta. So we were flying all, low level. I never, like driving, because to me, I'm there, but I'm not there. You see, I remember my mum's died, so everything's happening, and I'm like trance, like I'm happy anyway. I get to Saigon, and I get introduced to an Air Force guy that's going back on RNC, and he's going to be with me. Then we get told that we're going to go on the plane, and I go up the plane. Of course, like you can imagine, like it is now, 1A, 1B, all A class, and down the back is the chickens, and where we would normally operate from. And the stewardess said, oh, I'm sorry to hear about your mum. You'll be in seat 1B. I said, no, that can't be right. Yes, that's your seat. So I got up in this seat, and it's an R&R flight. So there's a couple of brigadier generals and colonels. So it goes down, starts with the stars all the way down to the chickens. So I'm sitting there, I'm going, oh, and then I get here. They fly me up to Brisbane. I know it's a long story, but it's got a real kicker at the end.
Yeah.
A week into it, they come and say, oh, you don't have to go back to Vietnam. You can stay here if you want.
Oh, really? So that was how you left?
No. I said, no, I'm going back to Vietnam. I'm not going to leave my mates, It was, I signed up to do a year. I'm not going to leave my mates up there and just get out of it. And I said, that's all right. So later on, I met the guy that had been posted in to replace me, and he got diverted to somewhere else. The story is my brother was training in 4RAR in Townsville in the Army.
Just in training?
In training. He got issued with a rail certificate to travel from Townsville to Brisbane for the funeral and to go back to Townsville on the rail.
Mm.
Where in actual the other thing that happened is because I didn't have any documentation with me to come back to Australia. The Air Force actually put on a Canberra jet bomber to fly my passport from Phan Rang to Saigon so I could get in and out of the country. That was the difference between the Air Force and the Army. So do you think in the next 20 years in my Air Force career that I didn't think that the Air Force had a bit of credit when someone was in a bit of problem?
Yeah, for sure.
That's what they did for a 19-year-old boy.
Yeah, that's amazing.
They couldn't have done. They didn't have to do anything. They could have just said, "Oh, you're here."
There's a bit of a difference to the corporal telling you that your neighbours can take your wife to the hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it was good. Yeah.
It looked after you.
Yeah. Sorry, but they're just stories of what happens in the war. I mean, it's just the way it is. I mean,
You think it was just the right person at the right time getting the information and saying we're going to look after this bloke?
no, it was the Air Force culture.
Yeah.
It was,
Would it happen to anyone?
Yeah, well, it did happen to other people. I know it happened to other people that they would just look after themselves. But I think when we were there for a whole year, and there was no ringing home, there was no the only contact you had with home was by the post.
Mm.
So there was no ringing home, there was no telephone calls, there was no internet, there was no nothing. It was just you just there. And I think just talking to contemporary veterans, they went the wrong way. Instead of having
with the Army and Air Force.
Well, yeah, instead of having a year-long deployment, or like when my dad went overseas, like you deployed to England or the Middle East, you were there until they wanted you to do something else. They then started rotating people. And I think 5 months and 3 months and 6 months tours compared to 1 year tour, I'd prefer the 1 year rather than 6 months, because the time you did the 6 months, then come back and now you got to go back. And I think what got to a lot of people is once we'd done a year's tour of Vietnam, it was very difficult to go back to Vietnam again. They're very reluctant to send you on a second tour.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people that do the shorter stints, the 3 to 6 months, end up getting out because they get home and they're like, I don't want to go back, or they get the shits with the politics and stuff of just doing sort of silly training exercises that they feel that aren't even realistic compared to what it is.
Yeah, once you've been, that's what I felt when I came back as an Eddie, that there was no more wars, there was no more. All I was looking at is becoming a drill instructor, and I thought, well, that's not what I want to do.
Yeah.
I don't want to become a drill instructor. I don't want to do this. And they were even thinking of disbanding the Edgies after the war. There was a lot of talk about what they wanted them, and they kept them in the end. But
yeah, they're still going.
Yeah, they're still doing them, and they keep changing their role. But they're a lot more professional than what we were. I mean, the problem we had when we were in Vietnam was our leadership had been drill instructors. So unlike the Army, where you'd become a section commander by coming up through the ranks, you might be in a machine gun group, and you get assessed by these people joined the Air Force to become drill instructors. So they were corporals from day one, and then they decided they would be section commanders. So they just put them in charge of a section without very little training. And
so they didn't work their way up from a private; they're just straight in charge of people. Yeah, wow.
In a combat role, so. They were not prepared. They failed them in their leadership. So a lot of these people were not, they were
not worthy of the title.
They didn't have the training. They didn't have the background. They didn't have the skills.
Yeah, so can't really blame them.
No. So but now they fixed all that stuff up, and they're
same for the rank system as the Army.
Yeah, they're a lot
work your way up.
Training and stuff like that. Well, obviously when we come back. We started to work our way up through. I mean, I was promoted to corporal.
You were LACs out leading aircraft?
Yeah, so it's not like a Lance Corporal, it's just a classification.
So that's the initial rank, like private?
Yeah. You come in as an AC, aircraftman,
but
then you get, after about 18 months, you get reclassified to a leading aircraftman. It's not a rank. The only first rank in the Air Force is a corporal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the corporal sergeant, flight sergeant, warrant officer. There's only one warrant officer in the Air Force. There's not more than one. There's no two warrant officers.
As in the Air Force as a whole?
No, there's only one rank of warrant officer. It's not warrant officer class 1 or class 2.
1 and 2,
yeah. Yeah. So, but a flight sergeant, the Army doesn't even have staff sergeants anymore. They do.
No, get rid of them.
Yeah, well, the Air Force still has flight sergeants. So flight sergeant, corporal sergeant, flight sergeant, warrant officer is the non-commissioned ranks.
Cool. So you got your corporal?
No, I turned it down. So
then you went over to
becoming a logistics guy, and then I applied to do civil schooling, and then I did get promoted as a corporal in the Clark stream, and then I got sent to Australian National University, got my Bachelor of Economics.
What drew you to the stores? What is it?
Well, I wanted to get a university degree. So
Okay.
to get a university degree, if I wanted to become an ADGI officer, I would have had to go to Duntroon and do that. But if I wanted to have a career after the Air Force, I needed to have something. So I wanted to do an economics degree. And to do an economics degree, you had to come from the supply world.
Okay.
So it made a lot more sense to transit to be a supplier and then apply to be an economics degree through that, and then commission in the supply branch or the logistics branch. So
was that hard to transfer from ADGI to the other role? Were they resilient or?
No, well, because there was uncertainty about whether the role of the ADGIs were, they were allowing people to remuster if they wanted to, right? Because they didn't know whether the government was going to disband or the Air Force was going to disband the mustering. And a lot of people did get out because they said, well, if you want to get out, you can get out. If you want to do something else, you can do something else.
Okay.
Because we don't know what we're going to do with or you can stay. And so eventually they made a decision to keep the ADGIs and at that stage. But I'd already put in the Air Force, you can apply for a remuster anytime you want. So there's no restrictions. So you just put in an application, and if you pass a simple test, matter of fact, one of the sergeants that was my ADGI, he'd become an equipment officer. So when I did that, my aptitude when I joined the Air Force, you have to do all these aptitude training. So I already had the aptitude to become a clerical person because they tried to talk me out of being an ADGI. Said, no, you can do this, and all these jobs because I didn't discover till lately. If you walked into the Army, if you could breathe, you got a gun. In the Air Force, they did all these tests to see what you could do in the Air Force. So it was quite different approach to recruiting. I don't know if it's different now, but I know.
I think Tri-Service is the same now. You go and you do your aptitude test, and then they give you a list of these jobs are available to you based on your aptitude. Whether or not you'll succeed in them or not, it's a different story.
Yeah, so obviously my aptitude test meant that I could do clerical work and all that sort of stuff. So, and I was accepted. I got promoted to corporal as an ADGI, and the same group captain I was talking about called in. He said, mate, you got a decision. You can be either a corporal ADGI or you can go and do this course. And I said to him, I think I'll go and do this course. And he said, I remember him. His name was Group Captain Jackson. He was a Lancaster pilot during the Second World War, and he apparently rode one into the ground because he had a gummy shoulder. And he said to me, big gruff man, he said, yeah, mate, I think you made the right decision, mate. I went down Wagga and learned how to wrangle it. Instead of wrangling a machine gun or an SLR, I was wrangling a typewriter. But it was good because it was good because the Air Force was then computerising. So at Fairburn, we were a test base for the computerisation. When I first joined it, we were sitting on these big books, entering ledgers about so one pen out, or boxes of pens, and you're writing it down like something out of Charles Dickens' novel. Then suddenly we become computerised, and we got taught how to use computers, and that helped me in my career. That's my first introduction to computers, and it was good value.
Good timing, yeah.
Yeah, I just landed on my feet, so it was good.
So when you commissioned into being a supply officer, did you?
Yeah. So I went to university full time. When I graduated from university, I then became an officer. Yeah. So
how long did you stay in for as an officer?
I did 5 years as an ADGI, 7 as a clerk supply, because that part of that was going to university part time.
Okay.
And then I did 7 years or 8 years as an officer. Yeah.
Oh wow! Did you deploy again?
Hey,
did you deploy again?
No, just to Darwin. I became a specialist in Northern Territory, so we got deployed to Darwin to fix it up. The base was in a bit of disarray after Cyclone Tracy, so we went back to Darwin to get the base fully operational again, to recommission 2 control and reporting unit, to welcome 75 Squadron back from Malaya, and then start the Pitch Black series of exercises. So I was heavily involved in all the logistics side of that. And, of course, as soon as they had the Pitch Black exercises, they needed what they call a base combatant flight, which is people that normally cooks or clerks or aircraft maintenance or radio people. They suddenly got at night time, you got to take a gun and go and the Air Force. So as soon as they knew I was an ADGI, I became the base combatant flight commander. So I had to train all these people as that. And it was interesting because there was a history of Darwin where they'd been bombed twice in the bombing of Darwin, and RAF Base Darwin still shows a lot of the scars from the bombing. You can go around and see where shrapnel is and different things. And the airmen that were there were not trained in ground defence. And then someone gave them an instruction during the bombing, the second bombing, to go down the road and we'll feed you, which basically meant people just went wild. One guy made it to Melbourne on a bike without a chain. So, and you can imagine in 1942 what the track was down from Darwin to Alice Springs. It was, so he did it on a bike without a chain as a behind. But people, because they just got bad instructions. So when I had all these blokes there doing this training, they'd been trained for, when they did their rookies, they'd been given a rifle, they did a little bit of basic training, and then suddenly they're supposed to be doing this infantry type role. And like they were going out in the bush with blue overalls. It was just an absolute disgrace. And I wrote this scathing report about, that we'd learnt nothing since Darwin, and that all we were going to do to these blokes, because if someone comes and attacks the RAF base like that, they're not going to be ordinary diggers. They're not going to be militia people. They're going to be SAS. The people that were attacking, that did attack Fang Rang, were Viet Cong sappers, they called them, and they weren't. Sappers was just a word for their SAS. Oh, yeah. So they would come in to try and attack bases like that. And matter of fact, there was a contact between a group of ADGIs and an SAS and a sapper team, and that's where one of our guys won a military medal. So the issue is that the people who are going to come attack an Air Force base are going to be paratroopers. They're going to be special forces people. They're not going to be your run-of-your-mill infantry guy. Yeah. They're going to be highly motivated, highly trained, elite troops. And we're going to put these people out there that have fired a rifle 10 years ago. Yeah. So it was just I wrote this report, scathing report about, we'd learned nothing, and it was just disgusting, and this was just criminal. We were actually treating our people as criminal. Anyway, I'd forgotten about the report. Then a couple of years later, when I was down in Canberra as a staff officer, someone came up and said, "You're Fraser." I said, "Yeah," because we had a name badge. I thought, "Oh, you're pretty smart." Anyway, he said, "You wrote that report." I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you realise what the implication of the report was?" I said, "No." That's when they started training the Air Force, along with other, it wasn't just my report, but obviously they realised that the people have got to deploy. So that's why the standard of fitness and the standard of training in the Air Force has gone through they're not up to the training of the Army, but they certainly are a lot better trained than what they were when the poor old diggers that I was looking after at first pitch black were doing. So it's gone for the, I remember ordering OS packs for these people, which was the Army pack from Vietnam. And they came back and said, we haven't got 40 OS packs in the Air Force. We had to protect a radar installation. So I put in for camouflage netting to protect the installation. And they said, "We can't give you this netting. We've only got 7 of them in the whole Air Force." Yeah, right. So it was just totally blew open. That's what exercises are good for. Yeah. The training of people that, not to be trained to go out there at night time. You can't be a clerk during the daytime given a rifle and then go and try, even to a minimum level of infantry skills. So, yeah, well, that's kind of the Army's motto. You're always a soldier first. Yeah, and the Navy too. You talk to a Navy guy, you say to them what you do, they'll never tell you that they're a cook or a gunner or anything else. They'll say, I'm a sailor on HMAS. They never actually identify themselves as their trade. If you talk to the Army, it's a corps. In the Air Force, they'll always tell you what they do. I'm a cook. Specific job. Hey? Specific job. Yeah. They'll never tell you that I'm in 2 squadron or 6 squadron. In the Navy, you have multiple roles on the ship as well. That's right, yeah. So, everyone's involved in damage control. The boarding party, the fire party, the medical party. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. So when you did this report, is that when they asked you to come on and be the platoon commander to... No, that's because I was an ADGI. Once you're an ADGI, you're always an ADGI. So when I was in Darwin, I was the base search and rescue officer. These are all what they call secondary appointments. Yeah. So I was doing my normal job, but I had other appointments, and one was base combatant flight commander. And so we had, for example, a Mirage went down, so we had to go out into the swamplands to secure the Mirage. And we had to, because it was crocodile infested and there was wild boars, we had to be armed out there when we went out to actually do a line to pieces of stuff from the Mirage, and of course the Mirage was leaking, hydraulic fuel and that, so it was quite toxic, and we had to secure the area for the people to come and recover the Mirage and all that sort of stuff. So,
Yeah. Did you come across any wildlife?
no, but they came across. They were going to fill
it full of holes.
if they wanted to argue with a 7.62, even a good sized croc's not going to survive a 7.62 at short range.
No. Definitely not. Cool. So, any other memorable moments from your time on the dark side?
Oh, as I said, I joined the Air Force without a formal education. I was a CPA qualified accountant. I'd worked on. I went back to Canberra and worked on a couple of things which were really good. I worked on the Jindalee over the horizon radar, which was cleared the top secret. I remember going out there in Alice Springs one day and going out there and looking at aircraft taking on and landing in Borneo when they were doing the trials, which is pretty amazing sort of stuff. So I'm very proud of the fact that I was one of the lead people involved, and now that's not only is it a major component of the Australian air defence and maritime defence, because when I was there, they discovered it could pick up not only aircraft but ships, because it could pick up waves. So it's a very important meteorological and also air defence and maritime defence network. It covers the whole of Australia. People don't know it's there 24/7. So when people are talking about the Chinese naval force that came down the eastern thing, oh, you didn't know all about it, they would have known it. Not only did they know about it, but they knew about it a long time before, and they just don't tell people what they know. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, and so much the Jindalee Horizon system is so good, is the Canadians just going to spend $1 billion to put one in Canada.
Yeah, right.
So we've got three, one outside of Charleville, one in Alice Springs, and one outside of Perth.
So it can detect aircraft and ships
thousands of kilometres away.
Yeah, right.
It's really amazing.
It's funny that all over the news they're saying that they're completely undetected, these warships and stuff.
No, I can tell you that I got no operational, but the Jindalee radar system, the reporting unit, that operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's always monitoring the Australian airspace from the Indian Ocean right through to the other side of the Coral Sea. And I can tell you that, as I said, watching aircraft matter of fact, when we were there was a funny incident, if I can share this with you. I wasn't involved, but they showed me the example. They were scanning the Indian Ocean one day, and these, when I was involved with it, it's not secret or anything, they wouldn't come up as blitz like you see on the radar. They come up as squiggly red lines. So, and then you're able to interpret from the squiggly lines at that stage, they're probably more advanced now, what direction, speed and elevation and all that was. The scientists could do that. It was, when you're sitting there and talking to the scientists, you'd like someone talking to you in Latin. You're right. You're okay in the first three sentence. After that, unless you knew algebra and stuff like that, you were struggling.
Yeah.
But the incident was that they had all these squiggly lines show up in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And they thought, I wonder what this is. So they got on, contacted the Yanks and said, by any chance have you got an aircraft carrier operating this? And the next minute, all the squiggly lines stopped. The Americans were conducting launch and recovery exercises, so they picked up this American carrier in the middle of the Indian Ocean. The Americans are not like people knowing where their aircraft carriers are.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it was interesting. Yeah, that was good. And
how'd they hide it? Like on scramblers or something?
Well, we couldn't see the aircraft carrier, but you could see the aircraft taking off and landing.
They just stopped the
exercise. They didn't like that. So in future, so there's a lot more communication goes on with those pieces of kit. So it was interesting. So lots of interesting jobs. Like we recommissioned Tyndall. We set up Curtin over in Western Australia.
Oh, yeah. And,
the whole, mainly in the Northern Territory. So I became a specialist in the Northern Territory. And then when we decided to retire, I then retired in Darwin. As a matter of fact, the last job I had in Darwin was I became the first CO of 13 Squadron, which is the Air Force Reserve Squadron in Darwin. So I helped set up 13 Squadron. So that was one of the last jobs I had. Okay. So lots of good things, lots of good times.
So you got married when you got out?
Sorry?
A couple of kids by the time you got out?
Yeah, I got 2 kids. And one of the reasons we got out was at that stage, the Air Force management of the system wasn't very good. So I was going to be promoted to squadron leader, but I didn't know where I was going to go, and the kids were at Darwin High, and I thought, do we really want this uncertainty? You know, you're 38 years old. You think to yourself, well, in my control of my life was somebody in Canberra moving me around like a thing on a chessboard. And I didn't realise that I was going to move from one end of an mountain to the other. They didn't even tell you that. Like, so you're not going anywhere. You're just going to go from your office to the squad leader's office, and you're going to be on the squad leader. And they sent me down to Monash to do further studies at Monash University and all that. And I said, no, I'll get out. And because I'd become a CPA qualified, I was able to then just become an accountant in civilian life. And
so where did you find time to meet your wife? Was that while you were after you got back from
Vietnam? I met her. Actually, it's quite a moving thing. One of my friends got injured in Vietnam, and he got bone cancer because of his injury. He fell down he was on patrol at night time and he stepped in a hole and damaged his knee. And unfortunately, the medical people were treating him with infrared treatments of damaged tissue, but it wasn't. And he ended up very painful. And there was a bit of a confrontation between me and the base medical officer who was there, which I should have went to jail over because it involved a rifle pointing at somebody telling him to get my friend to hospital. And anyway, he went to hospital and the Yanks were astounded that this bloke hadn't been treated and he had bone cancer and they amputated his leg that night. So when we came back to Australia, he was 21. We went to his birthday party and he died a couple of weeks after that. His name's on the war memorial because he died within a certain time of coming back to Vietnam. And I met my wife at his 21st birthday party.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a whole bunch of edges there. And my wife came because her sister was going over the edging and she came there and I asked her to look after my scotch in port while I went to the toilet because I didn't want to trust my AG mates. And she kept the scotch in the port and we've been together for 53 years.
Wow. There you go. Beautiful. And 2 kids.
Yeah, they're both very educated. Both one works for Coles and one's just come back from New Guinea after doing 3 years and 8 work up in New Guinea. So, yeah, we're very proud of them. I think you've met my daughter, but...
Yeah.
Yeah, she said to say hello today when I was coming to see you. And,
G'day. When any sort of interest from them to follow the family footsteps?
My son went into the army and unfortunately he was involved in what the scheme called Ready Reserve. And this is where they were going to be trained for a year and then do 6 years in the reserve. But there was a tremendous amount of bastardisation and bullying going on at Kapuka and Singleton, and he was involved in that. And he's just recently, within the last couple of weeks, had a reconciliation with a full colonel from the army to apologise for the behaviour. They falsely diagnosed him. This is what you do for a living. They falsely diagnosed him as having shin splints when he had compartmental syndrome.
Yeah, well.
So he's had his whole life running around thinking he's had shin splints and he's had compartmental syndrome. And the beatings and the bashings and all that, he's got a 6-figure payout.
So he was physically abused by the chain of command?
Yeah, by the drill instructor.
NCOs,
yeah. Because there was all the beatings and that were happening and he was regarded as a witness, so he had to go to all these court-martials of corporals and stuff like that. Yeah, and the military police told the people that he was a witness, so he was assaulted by a bunch of
fellow soldiers.
NCOs, and the army's just recognised it, and he's up for a big payout.
Wow.
Yeah, but he's gone on and had a very successful career.
How long ago was that?
He was 19, so he's 50-something years. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So it's taken all that 40 years for him to recognise what happened back then. Because it was a brilliant idea, the Ready. In fact, the only one that worked well was the Air Force. The Air Force set up a 3rd squadron of Aggies and they were made up of the Ready Reserve, and that went really well, and those people are still... But in the Army, I don't know what happened, whether the drill instructors were threatened or something like that, but they just went terrible. I mean, I know one guy that went there, he was so damaged by the thing, he became a TPI at 19, and he's been a basket case ever since.
Oh, my God.
So they had big inquiries and stuff like that. And as I said, the last couple of weeks, this guy's had a reconciliation with the full colonel.
It must have meant a lot to him to finally get that call.
Oh, it was because he thought he'd done, no one believed him. But then, and I'll tell you what it was a result of was the Royal Commission into veteran suicide. They went and looked at his case and they said, I'm sorry, you've been treated badly. So even the ombudsman treated him badly. He got a payout from the ombudsman. I mean, he's an executive in a national company, but it's not what these things that happen to people, it's not when this happens to you, it's not what you could have done, it's how it restricts you to go so he suffers from PTSD. So all through his life, he's got what he's done with all these handicaps, these physical handicaps and PTSD. What could he have done if he didn't have that shit stuff happen to him? And when you think about, and I must say in the Air Force, whether it was my particular, because I grew up in a very tough neighbourhood and, there was tough domestic violence. It wasn't like a squalor, but East Mount Gravatt, you needed to look after yourself. Okay? You needed to stand up for yourself, right? And if you didn't do that, well, and we was 4 brothers, and as I said, 3 of us ended up in the army. And I remember at a function one time, we were sitting there and someone was mouthing off about someone and someone reached, I didn't really, he said, "Do you know who you're talking to?" That's one of the Fraser brothers. Oh, God. Because I learned to fight when I was 16 because I wanted, professional fighting. So I was going to fight in festival hall and all that sort of stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I learned boxing or?
Boxing, yeah. No, none of this fancy stuff, mate. That didn't come along to it. No one knew it.
Muay Thai's thousands of years old.
Yeah, but we didn't know about it in Australia. We didn't know about pizzas then. So I was supposed to know about Muay Thai. No cappuccinos, nothing, mate. Back in those days, if you wanted to fight, you just box. Even knives. No one would pull a knife.
Cuffs.
Yeah, no feeties, nothing. You just learn how to use it. So I learned how to fight when I was 16. So I trained and I was going to fight in Festival Hall in my life because I was only 16. My mum said, "No, you're not going in to fight at Festival Hall."
We went and fought for the country instead.
Yeah. But I mean, that boxing, well, you've seen me when we were doing boxing at Mates for Mates. That skill level was, I'll never regret not learning how to fight.
Yeah. Someone stays with you forever.
Yeah. And it gives you that confidence.
Yeah, it does.
And if someone hits you, you know what it's like to get hurt.
Yeah.
And how
you don't fear it. There's always a fear, like a fear of confrontation with if you don't know what it feels like, because you just, it's human, it's innate in us to fear that confrontation. But then once you've been hit a few times, you're like, oh, it's not even that bad, really. So just keep your eyes open, push forward.
Yeah.
It's a good skill to have. I remember before I started fighting, I was, see someone scary and I might cross the street or, start getting anxiety or something if I'm walking towards someone on the street and now it doesn't bother me.
No. Just with you now, just, that confidence in your own ability. I haven't recognised that till this interview, but I can actually take it back to learning how to fight when I was 14 and 15 where, you're going to hop in now you're going to spar this guy, There's no, well, I don't want to do it, coach. It's not like, you look forward to doing it, and there was no, when I was sparring, there was no such things as head guards or it was, if you missed one, mate, if you didn't get the one in, you knew about it. And
it's probably bloody hard leather gloves as well.
Oh, no, there was no, I didn't
less
know that.
padding than they have now.
No taping. No tapes in their hands or anything like that. They would just put a pair of gloves on and go. Yeah, no. Until I met you, I didn't know about taping. I've still got taping stuff at home that I don't use for the
hand wraps.
Yeah. So there was no hand wraps in those days. You put the gloves on and went for it.
Rocks coming at you. So how'd you feel when you got out and when you discharged in Darwin?
I think it was the time.
Good transition.
Yeah, well, I just think it happens to everybody. You've been in there for 20 years.
What year was this when you got out?
89. And really, when I became an officer, it's changed now, but I suddenly discovered an officer, particularly in the Air Force, unless you were an aviator, you're always going to be you're supposed to be in the 18, but you were never going to be in the 18. So you had a lot of, and I remember one example of this when I was in Russell offices. I was a flight lieutenant, which is the captain, and there was all these wing commanders, which are lieutenant colonels, and we were on these projects, right? Anyway, I got called into the group captain's office, and he said, I'd been in for about 17 years at this stage, and he said, you know what? I think we need to pick this, get the morale going here. I thought, oh, yeah, okay, sir. He said, I think we need a social affairs officer. I said, yep. He said, I think you're the man. I said to him, this group captain. He ended up becoming deputy chief of the Air Defence Force. I said, Group Captain Riding was in. I said, sir, what does this mean? I pointed to the parachute wings on my shoulder. He said, you're a parachute trainer. I said, that's good. I said, what does this mean? This is my Vietnam medal. He said, you were in Vietnam. I said, what did I do in Vietnam? So everyone knows you were an AG in Vietnam and it's Fang Rang and you were pretty good at it. He said, do you really think that I'm going to be the social affairs officer for 9 wing commanders? He said, no, I thought you'd say that. I'll get the navigator. But the hierarchy there was a fighter pilot, there was a bomber pilot, there was a maritime pilot, there were all these different pilots doing different projects. And you could see the hierarchy. The fighter pilot get away with murder. When it got down to the push come the shove, the parole navigator did everything. Even the supply guys. So I'll never forget that. Look, where most people would go, well, you shouldn't say that to a group captain. I just said, you think I'm doing that, sir? You've got rocks in you. And he just didn't lose his, I'll get the navigator to do it. So being an AG was good in there because you always had that. Didn't matter what I did. It's the gratis. They just gave you the ground that you were going to. It didn't hurt that when I was nowadays saying corporal that if someone did cross my line, the skills that I'd learned as a 16-year-old sometime were applied, and it was someone wanted a blue. It wasn't I'll step outside and do it. It was this is the desk. Let's start right here.
Don't bother going all the way outside.
Yeah, we're not going to waste money. We're here right now, and and things like that.
Did you ever get in any trouble for scrapping?
No, as a matter of fact, I honestly never once in the blues that I had in the Air Force. I never once. I remember having a fight with a guy as an AG, and we had a fight, and he came back. I went to bed, and it was cold, so there wasn't any heating in Fairburn, so it was minus temperature outside, and he had half-heady boots on. He stepped on my bed and started to give me a little bit of touch-up with the boots, and then I got out of bed. When I got out of bed, I split his, using the skills I learned as a 16-year-old, I opened up his eyebrow right across, and he decided after that he couldn't see out of his eye anymore, that maybe it was, and we went to the place next door. So I went to the thing to get my lips stitched up, and he went to get these eyes stitched up. The doctor said, I think it's going to So, like some of the fight, but most of the people that needed a bit of a touch up, they really deserved it. And, and unlike the Army, the Air Force doesn't have such a things as extra duties and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You sort it out, and if you get charged in the Air Force, you get charged. There's no, you got to do extra work on the weekends, and that, which is really not military law. That if you get charged. I mean, I got charged in Vietnam for something whilst on active duty, and I thought, oh shit, we're going to go. There was a facility at Bung Tau called Back Beach, which was run by the military police, which is a pretty terrible place to go to. And I thought I was going to go to this place because I argued with this flight sergeant. He said, if you open your mouth one more time, you're going to go to jail. And I ended up in this American jail. And anyway, though I was a bit of a celebrity, they'd never had an Australian in the jail. So they come around pointing to me, oh, look at the Aussie we've got. Can I get you a cup of coffee or something? Anyway, I thought, anyway, what showed, this is another thing with the Air Force. The bloke who come down there, I was sitting there waiting to go to this, get this charge, because whilst on active duty, he carries some very serious penalties. Anyway, the warrant officer discipline, who's like his RSM come in, I thought he was just going to run through the mechanisms of the trial, because you got to represent yourself. There was nobody to help you.
Oh, really? And
he said, I've looked at this and I think you got an opportunity to get out of this one. I thought, oh, okay. So he said, now when you go in, you do this, you say this, you say that, you say that, right? Okay. And just, you do this and you might be right. So I fronted up to the officer and this is what you did. Why did you say this? I thought, I did this. Oh, okay. That sounds reasonable. Charge dismissed. So I got advice from it. And that's the thing where a warrant officer comes in. He could have just run. He was charged of running the procedure. He didn't have to come down to the lines. And sorted me out because he just didn't want someone to go get that sort of stuff. You know, when it turned out, you can imagine if I went for a commission and my record was whilst on active duty. So incidents like that, I think, made the Air Force quite, and, you know, talking to senior officers, like, you know, saying that to a group captain who ended up becoming like Air Vice Marshal, you just the way the Air Force operates, you have that freedom of opportunity, but still the discipline's there. I remember having, you know, they'd say, oh, you got to go and speak to this person when I was a corporal supply. I said, well, you're a corporal, you go and speak to him, but you're really a corporal. When you tell him to do something he's going to do, or something like that. Or when I was an officer up in Darwin, there's a blue with a sergeant. I come over and as soon as I walked in, quiet, and I said, what's going on here? Or after he settled down, I said, Sergeant, why did I have to come and do this? You're a sergeant. I didn't have to come and play sergeant. You're a sergeant. Look like a sergeant. Behave like a sergeant. Don't let someone talk to you like that. It's not helping him and it's not helping you. So, but the Air Force was really good like that. I mean, there are lots of characters and
I think the times have changed as well. Like, it used to be a bit more acceptable. I remember I got into a fight once and we both ended up in the hospital, me and another sailor. And I was in, like, I had my hand wrapped up and he had his eye patched up, and we're standing in front of the petty officer the next morning. He looked at me and he looked at him and he's like, you fucking idiots. You got it out of your system. All right, get back to work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, sometimes, as you said, you know, most people who, you know, need a little bit of a touch up. They work up, they earn it. They don't, you know. But afterwards, you know, as I said, you know, and some of those people get on and do, you know, once they've had that little bit of settling down, they get on and do some good jobs.
Well, that's it. Yeah. Become, you know, best mates afterwards, or you're still mates afterwards. Like,
there's Adgies, you know, if you had a blue and an Adgie, you can't have a beer after that. Got it out, bit of a dust up there.
Laugh about it,
yeah. So that's what happens, you know. So
yeah.
But the same in a football team, you know. You're training hard. You often hear about a couple of teammates, you know, they tackle each other hard and they get up and they respond and the coaches come on, cut it out, and then next minute they go out in the field and they're friends, you know. It's just physical contact or physical interaction.
That's it, yeah. When you're in that sort of high stress environment and and you're sort of training for that sort of thing. All right, so what now? What sense? So you said you started
I worked for 30 years as I sort of, even though I was in the Air Force Reserve, I migrated out of that. I sort of, you know, once you're out of it, you're out of it. I think, you know, you don't want to go back and relive it. So I didn't go to the mess. I didn't participate even. I must say, even with, you know, because of the dramas we had as a kid with Anzac Day, with my dad getting on the piss and coming home full of bad habits and fighting the Battle of Trabuc again at Al Alamein, I really didn't have much respect for Anzac Day. And I'd just like to share this story because it's a good way to end it. Maybe, I don't know how far it is, but this is a good thing about Anzac. And this is something that happened. When I came back from Vietnam, my dad was living with us. He'd had a stroke and my mum had died, as I said, in Vietnam. And I took him, I'd come back in March and the Anzac Day, the first Anzac Day when I come back. So my dad had a reunion of the 2nd 15th Infantry Battalion, which is a very famous battalion in the 9th Division, and also the 1st Battalion, 1st Infantry Battalion, which had fought in World War One, and they'd actually been heavily involved in supporting the 2nd Infantry Battalion, like making sure they had, you know, looking after them, mentoring them and all that. So this joint reunion. So I took my dad. So the people that were at the reunion were, my dad was in his late 40s, I was in my early 20s. The guys that were in the 1st Battalion were in their 60s and maybe 70s. So that puts the age range there. And, of course, I walked into this thing where you got blokes from 2nd, 15th, Tobruk, Al Alamein, Finch Haven, Ballabacan, plus the people who'd been to, you know, the 15th Battalion was one of the battalions that landed at Anzac Cove. So these people were there. And talk about it's been like the first day if you're going to be picked to play the Broncos and you walk in the room, in the locker room, and there's Payne Haas and all these people, and you may get the chance to run and train with them, whether they don't play them. So I'm in this room, to me, and all Army guys, so I'm Air Force guys. I was like, oh, shit. Anyway, I was there to support my dad. It wasn't about me. So they're all doing their Anzac Day stuff, and I'm over in the corner. Next minute, one of these First World War diggers starts walking over towards me. And I thought, oh, yeah, okay. And he said, what you doing? I said, I'm sitting here. My dad, yeah, I know your dad. He said, you're going to come over? I said, well, really, I don't think it's appropriate. I said, oh, Vietnam, you girls are World War One, World War Two. You know, what we did over there probably means nothing. You know, how could I, you know, I'm in the Air Force. You guys don't have a very high opinion of Blue Orchids anyway. Oh, okay. He asked me what I did, and I told him what I did. He said, yeah, I just got that feeling about that you may have done something, even though you're in the Air Force, you got that look in your eye, you know what I mean, that stare. Anyway, he said, you know what, I'll tell you the story. He said, who do you think is the biggest hero? And I'll release it, I'm related to the First World War. The guy who died next to me on the destroyer and never got to land at Gallipoli, or the guy that died in the last battle we were in France. I said, well, they're all heroes. You're all heroes. He said, where you die or what happens doesn't make any difference. Mm. He said, yeah. He said, once you, and that's what I say to a lot of non-veterans, or they're all veterans, but not veterans that may have been seen active service.
Oh, combat veterans, yeah.
I say, he said, you know what? It's not what you do, it's whether you're prepared to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
And he said, you know what? If we were at Pozieres or the Somme or up in Mezzanine, Polygon Wood, and the skipper says, hop, and this is the terms they use in the World War, the skipper says, hop across the bags, which was the sandbags. He said, what would you do? I said, and I'd already reflected on that. Remember when I was given the offer of not going back to Vietnam? Mm. I'd already proved that I didn't have to go back, but I wasn't going to let my mates down and go back. And it's just straight away, well, of course I'm going back.
Yeah.
And he said, what would you do? I thought, I'd do what I'm told. I'd go across the thing. He said, that's right. He said, now come across and have a beer. So the next 4 hours, I fought the Battle of Bloody. We'd swap from the Somme to Alamein to Brook, back to Pozieres, back to in the Hindenburg line, across to the bloody landing, and then Vietnam. Oh, what gear did you have in Vietnam? What were you doing? You did this. Oh, you went and done that. Oh, wow. And all them jet planes and everything like that. And also but he showed me, and I've said that story many times. It's not whether or not you do anything. It's whether you want to do it. And it's like we're talking about fighting. It's not whether you're capable of doing it, it's whether you're going to hop in the ring. Mm. The hardest thing about being a boxer,
you got it in the ring.
You got that little square. Everyone else is looking at you. You've actually got to step through the ropes.
Yeah.
And you know what? 99% of people would never step through the rope.
Yeah. Respect anybody that steps over those ropes.
Yeah. So I tell that to and it's amazing how many people say, oh, you know, my son actually marched in Anzac Day in Darwin the other day. Mm. Okay. I didn't do anything in Anzac Day. I went to see the Broncos game and I got soaking wet. And I come home dripping like a bloody. My wallet's still drying stuff out of my wallet. And I thought the next day, I didn't organise the battle. I'm not getting out of bed to go. And we did a lovely Anzac Day ceremony. That you know, someone had a fight with a veteran. They said, "Oh, that wasn't an Anzac Day ceremony." But if you're at Suncorp Stadium with 40,000 people and someone plays the last post, and there's diggers all lined in a quadrangle, and the army band's there, and the captains lay the roof. If that's not an Anzac Day ceremony, what do you want?
Yeah,
you know,
for sure.
To be there, 40,000 people, quiet as a mouse, with the bugle after the lovely welcome to the country, which no one booed or carried on about. You know, it was just perfect. And I thought, well, I'll just go home. And one of the things I did do when I retired is we went to Europe, and I was able to attend Anzac Day ceremonies, Villers-Vetnox in France. And that was one of them. I went and did a tour of all the battlefields in World War One, and I went and attended the Anzac Day ceremony at Villers-Vetnox. And this is before it's even as popular as it is now, and it was quite moving to be there. And I remember when I did put my Vietnam medals on, there was a Belgian television crew there, and they followed me all down way around. They'd never seen an Aussie Vietnam veteran.
Yeah,
when
right.
we went there, and what was moving was the way the French population, I just thought, they must be sick of doing this. And it was real. And when the kids come out and lay the wreaths, when we do they do a Anzac Day ceremony for the 5 infantry divisions of the AIF, plus they do an Anzac Day ceremony for the French. Okay. And just the way it is, and you go to the school, which was built, and it's just so moving. And once you do that. But to me, on Anzac Day, because I lost a couple of mates in Vietnam, and of my section of 10 men, 5 of them are not longer with us. So 5 of my colleagues that I went to Vietnam or served in Vietnam have now moved on. And really, Anzac Day is not to wrap yourself in the ceremony, not to do. If that gives you if that's what you want to do it.
Yeah.
But if you want to stay at home with your family, or if you want to do something else, like I stay home with my wife, I watch the ceremony in Anzac Cove, I watch the ceremony at Billers Petnall. If you want to do that, that's okay too as a veteran. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do, because the mates that you were with, they can't do that anymore. If they can't get up and have a breakfast, you don't have to I don't even drink rum anymore, as I told you before. I learned that. So a gunfire breakfast. But if you want to do that, you want to wrap yourself in the ceremony. But if you don't want to do it as a veteran, you shouldn't feel guilty about it.
No.
Because the mates that you were with, they don't do it. They don't have that decision. So I'll march if I want to march. I'll participate in a dawn service if I want to. But if I don't do it, I don't feel guilty about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel the same way.
Oh, good.
I feel that veterans, I think Anzac Day is like thanking veterans for their service and those that have made I like the saying, for those that have made the ultimate sacrifice, or those that have been willing to do so, because that's what it's about. Like, you might not have ever been put in a situation where you were, where that ever became a possibility. But if you are willing, if you know that if you would have been asked to, you would have gone. Then that's just as
like the nigger said to me back in 1970, 1971. If you'd done it, would you do that question? And if you can look someone in the face and say, "Yep," and if you're looking at someone like that, you try to blow smoke up their bum, they're going to know about it straight away. So, as I said, you've got to have steel in your eyes. And if you've got the steel in your eyes, you do it. And that's what I'm saying. So Anzac Day is all about that sort of stuff. And if you don't, as I said, I went to an Anzac Day ceremony on the Thursday night. It was lovely. It was moving, very touching. I've been to Anzac Day ceremonies in Ambon, in New Guinea, in Indonesia. I've done tons in Darwin. I've done plenty of Anzac Day, plenty of times at the War Memorial in Canberra. And if you don't want to do Anzac Day, don't do it. But sometime during the day, have a thought about the people. So I often think about the guy that I met, Ronnie Hewitt, who didn't make it past his 21st birthday, or Dave Dubber, who got killed in, a chopper was shot down, or Ronnie Sheriff, who died, and two pilots that got blown out of the air when I was in Vietnam. So all them people, that's what you do. And I don't think you're being disrespectful. I think it's what you do. And as you say, what you feel comfortable with, that's all you got to do. You don't have to prove anything to anybody. You don't have to.
Yeah, 100%.
You don't have to say.
It's like you're going down there for a show. Like if you don't do it, you don't care. Well, that's not true at all. You've done your time. I think more of a civilian sort of thought is that, you're thanking the men and women for their service. But if you are part of that service, then it's up to you whether you want to participate or
because you're doing that. As I said, people can't do it, so it's not. And it's not this being disrespectful. So Anzac Day comes around every year, so you participate. And if you don't feel like participating in it, you shouldn't participate in it.
Yeah,
because it could
should be
trigger
completely up to you.
Yeah, you could you could come away feeling worse than what you do. And as I said, I don't drink on Anzac Day. I don't. It's not to me. I don't play too up. I don't do any of that sort of stuff. I just go and do the ceremonies, and then the greatest part of it is going home, picking my wife up and taking her for a coffee.
Yeah, nice.
So I think, Anzac Day is great. I mean, Anzac Day when I grew up nearly died because of the drunkenness and the domestic violence and that. There was a very famous play called One Day of the Year. And I can tell you what, Anzac Day was on its last legs in the middle of the 60s.
Yeah, right.
People did not, you had the Vietnam War going on. People were, my generation was revolting against the stagnant. The people who went through the Second World War were great people. We owe them everything. But it's like they played the greatest grand final of their life. After that, it was all remembrance time.
Did you get any, I know in America it was quite controversial with the soldiers returning from the Vietnam War were sort of chastised. Did you have that in Australia?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I remember when I came home from my mum's funeral, my uncle was a wharfie. He was a member of the Communist Party, and my auntie used to run the cafeteria down at the Wharfies Club, so you couldn't get much redder than that. And I was at this function, before I went back to Vietnam, because I got 7 days R&R and then 7 days compassionate leave, right? So I was here for 2 weeks. And this guy came up to me and said, you don't have to go. The Air Force told me I didn't have to go back. This other guy said, you don't have to go back. You can desert. They'll look after you. What the fuck are you talking about? You don't go back. Anyway, my auntie heard it. She's like, get the hell out of here, you mum. So my uncle threw him out of the party, you know. But yeah, there was, you know, it was just, you know, and people saying, oh, you didn't fight it because they didn't understand it. And it was just, you know, and I remember a very good friend of mine when I was in Canberra, he was a leading person in the moratorium. When they got together and talked about the moratorium, you'd think they would be talking about Anzac Day. But it was such a bad war. When I got there the first day, Harley, you know, we did our job, we done our duty, but it might have been like the guys that were in Afghanistan. Day one, you were there. This is not going to win. I felt like a German soldier in France in 1942. These people didn't want us here. All we were doing was propping up a corrupt regime. It was the Americans. I mean, I saw the American military at its worst stage. I mean, we're on our base. The most frightening thing that happened to me in Vietnam was being in a knife fight with a Mexican when I didn't have a knife. We went to
a Mexican US soldier.
Yeah, we went to Yemen. So we went to this American mess to drink beer with them because, you know, we were like celebrities. You go there and, oh, here's an Aussie, you know. They always wanted slouch hats or something like that. But we'd go there and drink anyway. I mean, this cook got himself in the strife. So the famous call, Aussie, Aussie, Aussie. We've come running over to help him and he's decided that we've helped and he's decided to go locate somewhere else. Next minute I'm facing this Mexican with the sharpest knife I've ever seen in my life. And I had to talk him down from it. I didn't hit him or anything like that. I just, you know, what do you know? I'm a Catholic. You're a Catholic. Well, who do you support? And the Mary Mother of Christ. Well, I said, that's the one I'm. We're on the same team, but just put the ship away. Yeah. But the whole thing was African Americans, Mexicans, and Anglo-Saxons. During the day, they'd work together. At night time, they wouldn't.
Yeah, right.
Matter of fact, I was, you know, one of the things I was there, which is tragic. I was there. Someone said, I've had enough of that. Next minute, there's an explosion. The guy had fragged his sergeant.
Oh, wow.
And it was with the 717th Air Cavalry. And I just said, my legs don't need to be here. So this is how you become, after 10 or 11 months of war, someone's just been killed. Well, I'm not going to hang around for the aftermath. I just left. You know, that's their problem, you know. It just you know, and just the whole military was
over the edge.
Whole military was just falling apart, and it was, you know, reflected in their country. But there, I went to America in August last year. Went to Alabama. I went to Huntsville, Alabama, which is the home of the rocket people and that, and the memorial there to American servicemen. Just for a medium-sized town in America, it was quite moving. It was just fantastic.
Yeah, no.
So they
turned it around.
But Vietnam was just because it was wrong. And it was just the corruption, the killing. You know, again, I can give you one more example of where it was wrong. One of the jobs we had to do there was go up in forward aircraft control as a spotter. So my turn came and I went down, hopped in this little Cessna, and because it was cramped in the back seat, the only weapon I had was a 40 Mike grenade launcher, right? So we're up in the air and the guy's like, oh, we've got a contact with the Viet Cong. Oh, okay. Oh, well, this is good. We're just going to be looking out the aircraft window for 90 minutes or 2 hours or whatever we were up there. So he flew over and he said, he took over from another forward aircraft control and he said, they're down there. I said, yeah, okay. I said, I don't see anybody. And he said, no, they're down there. I reckon he's down there. They're down by that tree. I said, there's nobody there. He said, no, they're down there. He said, anyway, we've called in helicopters and fast jets. Okay. For what? Well, the Viet Cong are down there. Okay. So the F-100s come in and drop napalm all over the place and shot it up with 20 Miller Canyon and dropped a couple of bombs and helicopter gunships come in. And he said, and then, how'd we go? Well, we got them. Okay. He said, you better fire some of your rounds out the window. So I'm 40 Mike out the window. Good. He said, now, what's the thing? He said, two of them, we're going to give 2 of the kills to the F-100 pilots, 2 to the gunship, and my spotter's got 8 or 7. So I'm recorded in the history of Vietnam War killing 6 people. And all we did was blast the shit out of some rocks. And so that's
really?
corrupt. But they couldn't go out and do a mission like that unless they had
How to win.
a win. That's become a statistic. So honestly, there was nobody there. Not that they're going to call it off and send the planes home. No, we've committed to it. And I said, this is stupid. So I've been recorded as killing 6 Viet Cong.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, which were hiding underneath us. So we know the figures of death, Viet Cong death in Vietnam are inflated by
10-fold.
Yeah, so that's the stupidity of war, and you talk, and then when we come back, as I said, in the Air Force, it wasn't too bad because we were all volunteers. But one of the jobs I had in the Air Force before I finished was take the Northern Territory contingent down to the Welcome Home March in Sydney. So my job was to organise, liaise with all the ex-service organisations, get all the people there, get them on the 707, fly them down to Sydney, and then bring them back home again. And that's where I found out the real difference between the Army and the Air Force in this sense. One guy we met there was a national serviceman. He'd been in the jungles in Vietnam fighting on patrol with one of the battalions, and this was Wednesday. His time in the national service was up on Friday at 12 o'clock. So he's in the jungles on Wednesday. They suddenly realised that he had to come out of the jungle. So he's pulled out of the jungle, back to Neridat, put on a plane back to Australia, gets to Sydney at 6 o'clock in the morning after flying halfway around the world, gets processed and is out of the Army at midday. So he's gone from being on active patrol in the Army.
2 days later.
2 days later, he's a civilian. Now, in the First World War, it took them 18 months to get everyone home, and that's where Monash was really good. He organised training, people to do skills and all that to progress them back into civilian life, right?
Yeah, nice.
And my dad got them skills. Remember I told you about being a carpenter? He was a timber cutter before the war. He ended up as a carpenter. This guy, imagine yourself, you're in the jungle fighting a war, and less than 2 days later, you're a civilian.
Standing at a bus stop, man. What the fuck?
And no support, nothing, just see you later, out the door.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of Vietnam vets, and when they come home, like when we came back from Vietnam, we came into Mascot Air Corps in civilians at 11 o'clock at night time. There's your hotel room in Mascot. Nobody welcomed us, nothing. So we've come from a war zone back into Sydney. Who are the Rabbitohs playing tomorrow? What's going on? And it's a complete lie. You cannot adjust. Your brain, you can't go from being in a war zone to being in a civilian life. And it doesn't matter what you did. It wouldn't matter if you were a cook at Phan Rang. You've been living under that pressure cooking 177 days of the year. Rockets are coming over. You don't know whether when that airline siren goes, you don't know whether that one's coming for you or someone else. People are dying on the base. You're doing it. You're working 12-hour shifts and all that sort of stuff. The next minute you're home and you can't talk about it. No one's interested in it.
How long did it take you to come to terms with it?
Well, again, we were pretty lucky because all the people in my unit had all been in Vietnam. So and my brother in my family, my father was a veteran. My 2 brothers were veterans. So I was surrounded by people that cared. Right? And even when I went out to Longreach when I first came back, my grandmother's funeral, I went out to Longreach. I was treated with respect in that. And I talked to you about the veteran. People said the World War II veterans and that treated the Vietnam veterans with disrespect. Well, I told you the story with the World War I vet. That's not been my experience. However, I do know other people, and I do know other people suffered through disrespect and that. I do know that. And the RSL has made a big effort to try and not make the same mistake they made with Vietnam vets, that with contemporary veterans. And that's why organisations like Mates for Mates and stacks of organisations exist to support contemporary veterans. That's the way it should be. But personally, I didn't experience it because my father-in-law was a vet from the World War I. My wife was a daughter of an Army veteran, Army person. My 3 brothers, 3 of us had served in Vietnam. My oldest brother served in Borneo and Vietnam. So we had this support network all around us. I didn't suffer it. However, I do know particularly when I went down to Sydney with the Welcome Home, the way the Army got treated worse than the Air Force and worse than, because we were all volunteers.
Mm.
The Army were national service. And that's why you hear idiots say we should bring back national service. They got no idea what national service is about.
Mm.
If we need to go to war and there is a real fair income threat like it was in 1942, you won't have any problem getting people to sign up to fight for our democracy. It won't be. It's not going to be an end or an up. People will do it. If they know what they got to do, they will go and do it. But to take people out of their lives and put them in a uniform for 2 years just to fill up the numbers, then guess what? You're going to end up with the same casualties they're getting in Ukraine. If you don't want to fight, we talk about the boxing and the mixed martial arts. If you don't want to do it and you can't do it, it doesn't matter what you do, that person will not become that person. They've got to want to do it. We said about that they're crossing the line. So when we need to do, and it happens in national emergencies, it happens in accidents, it happens, the stabbing in Sydney, 2 French nationals and a lovely police officer stepped in to stop the carnage, right? People stand up all day, every day. There's a ceremony yesterday at Government House where people were presented awards for it. People will do it when they have to do it. But if you tell people they've got to do it because a politician wants them to do it or something like that, and then you get the people getting like in Vietnam, the poor people, the black people, the Mexicans were all doing all the heavy lifting. The rich Anglo-Saxons, Americans weren't there. They got out of it. 2 presidents, Bill Clinton on the Democrats and Donald Trump, and also one of the Bushes got out of military service because they could do it. They didn't actually go and do it because they wanted to do it again. They got out of doing it. So,
yeah, shin splints or something. Old Trump.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, bone spurs, mate.
Yeah. They need to go back to the old days where the leaders of the country were on the front lines. Well, not on the front lines, but on the battlefield, because they're so detached from it now that they just,
Well, one of the things I've done in my life is I studied the Roman Empire. And one of the things of the Roman Empire, from the age of 12 onwards, if you wanted to be a politician, you had to do some serious military stuff. So you look at Caesar or Octavian, all them people, they didn't get where they were. And at the height of the Roman Empire, every one of the emperors had seen serious military service. I could give you names,
It's pretty much all throughout history.
Yeah, that's right.
The leaders of other countries were the fiercest warriors.
Yeah, that's right. So you got to. So the fact is that I saw nationals, and that doesn't say, look, the people that were national, and I know national servicemen that served in Vietnam and did it very well. I went walking with one today that was a national serviceman who became an officer and did, had a great career in the Army. But at the end of the day, I got called up. My ballot came. I was advised that I'd been selected for national service. My ballot came up 10th of July, 1970. I was 20 years old. The ballot came out.
You're already in there.
Yeah, I was in Vietnam. So I wrote back to him and said, I'm sorry I can't do this. What's the reason? I'm already here. I've been here for 6 months. So
we're tracking it very well.
Yeah. So, and the random things like that are terrible. So you get it and you don't get it. And a number of people tell me, I didn't get a ballot. I didn't get selected. And what's the problem with it? It's like people we had the cyclone here, Cyclone Alfred. We were in Darwin for 30 years. The cyclone's a little bit more serious up there. And I say, the more of the Cyclone Alfreds you can clock up, put a notch in your back that you didn't happen, it didn't need it, you didn't need to do it, the better you are. Because the one that's not going to be like that, like Tracy, you do not want to remember that. That's not one you want to visit. So you can miss them, good. You don't need to do that. And
Yeah, it's pretty common amongst the whole veteran community. Everybody wants to go to war until they do.
Well, the problem with it, as I said, the trouble with war is that once you've done it, and you can talk about it. But the fear, being in Vietnam, where you go from a country from Australia where life is cherished and beloved and everything. You go to Vietnam where the cheapest thing is a human life.
Mm.
And it's turned around. It's like in Ukraine. It's like in Afghanistan. It's like all those places.
Well, we've been going for a while now, mate.
Yep. You got a lot of editing to do.
I got a couple of little things for you, little trinkets to thank
lovely.
you for coming on.
Thank you, Harley.
Some merch, got a sticker and a keyring for you there.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. And I hope that
wear those with pride.
I think it's a great initiative that you've done. I think recording people's oral history, once it's on the net, it's great. And I think I congratulate and I hope it's successful. And I think the more veterans, both female and males, that you can get to share their stories from across different. One thing is common that I learned from talking to the bloke from Gallipoli, that honestly nothing changes, but the fact of the matter is that what people are going to do is be proud of their service.
Yeah. No, that's what I want, leave a legacy. Your kids can look back on it. Future generations can look back on it. Even my kids will be able to look back and learn more about me, But yeah, on the other, what you just said, being proud of their service, there's a lot of things to be proud for, and we should be proud and not try and hide in the shadows and be downtrodden because of maybe things that have happened in other sort of conflicts or situations.
Well, and as I said, if something happens to you, just know that there are people, that the mateship that you found in the services, the people that I've experienced over the decades that have got themselves into strife, and I've unfortunately know many people that have opted for the Pineapple Express. That you don't need to do that. They're, in your darkest hour, there'll be someone that will come up and support you.
Yeah.
So if don't let everyone. And as I said, if it's any consolation, I've only had nightmares since 1971. So really, and I remember talking to a vet. One of the great things about my Air Force career, I went to Anzac. I've been to Commonwealth Grave ceremony. I was just counting today. I've been the ones up in Belgium. I've been to the ones in France. That's Build a Veteran, and up at Yipes. I've been to Ambon. I've been to Darwin. I've been to New Guinea. I've been to Singapore. I've been to many Commonwealth Graves Society. And I remember talking to an Ambon vet who fought in Ambon, got captured by the Japanese, was incarcerated in the same barracks that he'd been living in, then get exported to China to be working slave labour in China by the Japanese, then go to a little town called Hiroshima and experience a bit of instant sunshine.
Oh, wow.
And I said to him, how did you survive all that shit? And he said, you know what? I just went bush for 4 years. He said, when I come out of that, I said I was that. So
got himself right.
So if you think you as a vet have been through hell, let me tell you that there are other veterans that have been through twice as much. But if you talk about it, support your family. Don't use, in my experience with my own family, and alcohol is not the answer. Drugs is not the answer. You've got to exercise is the answer. To me, exercise is the most important thing apart from my loving wife and children. Exercise is the most important thing in my day. If I don't exercise every day, then the black dog can come out to play.
Yeah, right.
But the black dog walks beside me, can't keep up. It's only when I stop that the black dog gets a bit stronger. So
keep moving.
Yeah, so I think exercise, a positive outlook, associating with positive people, and don't, alcohol is never the answer. I'm sorry to say, I've tried that.
No, definitely not. It's slippery slope.
Yeah, it is. So thank you very much.
Very good advice. Thanks for being here, mate. Appreciate it.
And you'll edit out all the swearing.
That'll definitely stay.